From a top secret network of highly secure locations across South Texas, this is the play-in edition of the Spurs Insider Podcast. I am Mike Finger, joined by Express News beat writers Jeff McDonald and Tom Orsborn, along with sports editor Nick Talbot. We are closing in on one of the biggest days of the NBA season, the number 9 versus number 10 showdown in the Western Conference between your local Cagers, the Spurs of San Antonio, against the Pelicans of New Orleans. Is everybody ready? I'll just throw it out there. Are you ready for the drama? Ready for the mayhem? Ready for the history?
I mean, it's funny that you ask, but like, seriously, are you ready? Like, are you packed for like this? It could be an odyssey that we're about to embark on following this team around. Like, I just got back from Dallas a couple hours ago. I gotta throw a suitcase together, and I don't know what to pack.
Keldon Johnson, young Keldon Johnson, he of the loud voice, the improved 3-point shot, and the confidence of 1,000 men, says he's packing for four games. And I know that we don't ride the team plane, but there's a chance that on this road trip, the team that you cover, Jeff, might be playing 4 games. If you win in New Orleans, you move on to play the loser of the 7 versus 8 game, also historic, also surely dramatic, also surely riveting. You play the loser of that game at their home arena. That would either be the Target Center. It's still called the Target Center, right?
Yes.
In Minneapolis, Minnesota.
It's the off-Target Center when the Spurs play there, though.
Drum roll,
okay,
please, or whatever. Luis can insert the dump later, or the crypto. Whatever the hell they call it, the crypt, in Los Angeles,
the crypt.
What used to be the Staples Center back when times were more innocent and arenas were just named after corporations that sell you printers.
I just thought it was named after various office supplies. I didn't even know that was a store.
That could have been true too. That's the other option, is the crypto whatever in Los Angeles against the Clippers, not the Lakers. The Clippers are the ones that are going to be playing the Timberwolves in that 7 versus 8 game. If your local Cagers, if your Spurs survive that one, then they go directly to game 1 of the actual by God playoffs in Phoenix on Sunday, and you'd stay there for 2 games. The point we're all trying to make for our team, but I don't care about the team. I care about myself. Getting on an airplane tomorrow and flying to New Orleans, that much we know. But yes, after that, we could be back on Thursday, having a Mai Tai, like the season's over, or we could be gone for a week and a half. And we got to pack for not only New Orleans, but either Minnesota or LA and Phoenix. And I don't know if you've checked the weather channel, but like the weather in New Orleans and Phoenix is a lot different than the weather in Minneapolis. I don't know if you know this. I don't know if you're familiar with how weather patterns work. But like, I'm going to have to take like my Speedo and a jacket. I think I'm just going with the clothes on my back. I'm putting in one change of clothes. We'll be back on Thursday. I think I'll be fine.
You're probably right, but no, I don't know about that.
7 degrees.
Let's get into that. What do we think about our chances of being back on Thursday? Because I think that first one's just a coin flip. I mean, I could definitely see them beating the Pelicans, the local Cagers. I think we might be in for at least 2 games here. It's
probably a coin flip. I think you guys who have been poring over all the details can probably speak to this better than I can. But will this be the first time that the Spurs will play the Pelicans with their chosen postseason lineup? Postseason starting lineup.
This is true, and they've never. Yeah, Keldon. I brought that up with Keldon last night, and he corrected me and said that they had, and so he had me second guessing myself.
Good. And DeJounte Murray quickly pointed out that's they've got another player to worry about, right, Jeff?
Oh yeah, Valanciunas just murders the Spurs, just murders them. Especially, I mean, last year with the Grizzlies, and then this year he's just been just a handful. He's one of those guys that I always think Jakob Poeltl is a big fella. You see him a lot. You're interviewing him. You're up close to him. I've always thought he's a big fella. And then you see him next to Jonas Valanciunas, and you realize, no, Jonas Valanciunas is a big fella. Like he's just
that's actually a good point in terms of like the things that you notice going to NBA games that you don't really notice watching them on TV. I always would point out, and I realize he's a little bit past his prime, but just the breathtaking athleticism of like a Russell Westbrook. To see that in person, just like the TV doesn't do it justice. And like Valanciunas is just a huge guy. You don't realize that until you, like you said, you see him standing next to Jakob Poeltl or whatever. There's some breaking news on this podcast. There's some big fellas in the NBA, and that dude is one of them.
Back to DeJounte's point, in 10 career games versus the Spurs, he's averaging 18 points, 12 rebounds, shooting 61%. And that doesn't include the play-in game last year when he was with Memphis and he put up 23 points and 23 rebounds. So DeJounte, who watches a lot of film, is dead on with this scouting report, I think.
Okay, this segues perfectly into another, I guess, observation that I've had that may or may not hold any kind of water at all. But like, is it weird to anybody else that your local Cagers actually played in the play-in game last year? Like, I think part of it was because of the weirdness of the season. We weren't on the road. It was sort of a formality. Like it was clear that they weren't going to win that game against Memphis. But does this play-in feel different than the one last year did to anybody else on this podcast?
I think it feels different. Just the first thing you mentioned, we're going to be there in person. Whereas last year it was just an extra game to watch on my TV and do extra Zooms about. And it didn't really seem, when you have to actually, I mean, it sounds funny, but when like to do the thing we just mentioned, to go through the whole mental gymnastics we just mentioned of how do you pack for this thing, and I'm gonna kiss my children goodbye tomorrow and not know when I'm gonna see them again. You didn't have to do that last year, and so I think it registers a little different. They only lost that game to Memphis last year by 4 points. I know it was kind of a blowout for a long stretch of that game, but in the end they had a chance. That Spurs are good at that, like just always being in there. So I would be shocked if the game on Wednesday is anything but a barn burner down the stretch, no matter what happens for the first three quarters.
I think another thing that feels different about it is that it's not different to the Spurs. I mean, now Keldon, DeJounte, Jakob, Jelani, they all have a game under their belt in this kind of situation. So that's got to be an added plus for them. Remind
me what the fan situation was like in the play-in last year. We weren't there, so we don't know. But was Memphis? Were they full capacity? Were they? I don't even remember.
That's a good point, but still,
this might be more like a playoff type atmosphere. I don't know. I suppose I haven't canvassed the people in New Orleans. I don't know what they think about all this. Are they going to show up and be full throated and all that, or it's a Wednesday night in New Orleans. So New Orleans people are famous for packing it in the middle of the week. They only go out on the weekends. So I don't think it'll be raucous there at all. They got to work in the morning.
I think the other different, putting your flippant observation there aside, the other thing different, and maybe I'm wrong about this. The Spurs kind of had to work for this play-in, rightly or wrongly, by the way. But they had to work for it, and it became like this thing that they fought for at the end to make the play-in. All these young guys who've taken ownership of this team, as opposed to last year. I think it was more of a foregone conclusion for longer of the season. I may or may not be right about that. And then also it's like LaMarcus Aldridge had already packed it in at the end of last season. DeMar DeRozan wasn't long for this city. There didn't seem to be any enthuse. And again, we were covering the team via Zoom, so you have to put that caveat out there. But there didn't seem to be any kind of the same enthusiasm about that last year. It's almost easy to forget they were in the play-in last year.
I think when you're talking about building for the future and like experiences that can help a team down the road, win or lose, I think this play-in is a lot more useful than last one for the reason that you mentioned. They were leaning so much on guys who weren't going to be here anymore by the summertime, and this one belongs to this team, and these guys that are going to be part of, most of them are going to be part of this rebuild for the next couple of years. So I think this experience of them having ownership of this group and this play-in game belongs to them. It doesn't belong to DeMar and Patty Mills and Rudy Gay. It's going to be about what DeJounte Murray does and what Devin Vassell does. And, can Josh Primo be, plausible in a game like this? And, Lonnie Walker, like all these guys that you think are going to be key parts of the rebuilding process. This game is going to be a much, I think, more useful experience for those guys than the one last year when they were kind of sort of bystanders to what the veterans were doing. And I don't know if you want to get into this, but Pop alluded to this yesterday. There's this crazy stat where the Spurs, they basically only it's the worst record in NBA history with a positive plus minus. Like they scored 10 more points than they gave up this year, which usually is usually you're a winning team when you do that. And so they tied the 1976-77 Phoenix Suns for the worst record with a positive plus minus. And Pop was asked about that before the game in Dallas, and if he had any kind of diagnosis for that. And the answer was obvious. I knew what he was going to say before he said it because it's the truth. It's because they've lost so many close games. Also they had 4 games against Portland that they won by a combined about 247 points. But the games they lost were close. Going down to the wire, not quite pulling out in the fourth quarter, maybe having a fourth quarter lead and blowing it. Why is that? Well, that's because they're leaning on a lot of guys that haven't been in that position before, a lot of young guys that are inexperienced, and it was by design. Like the fourth quarter struggles were kind of, more of a feature than a bug as far as the roster was put together. And that's what Pop said. We basically release these guys. We let DeMar walk. We let Rudy Gay walk, Patty, LaMarcus. It was about 60 points off last year's roster per game that the Spurs let walk and didn't really replace with anybody. And so the object was, it was going to be these guys show sink or swim. They were going to learn. They were going to fail. They were going to lose some games. But like Pop said, we're not competing for a championship, so why not let these guys have the reins and grow from these experiences? So I think that's why you've seen a lot of games where they don't have, they're trying to figure out we've talked about it all year, trying to figure out their go-to guy and how to win those games on the stretch. There's a lot of games that they lost that way. And I think that's why you get this weird stat where they've got the positive point differential, but how many, what were they, 14 games under 500? They had a point differential of a 500 team. Like the math nerds say they should have been 41-41.
There's like everything else, there's multiple ways to look at that. On the one hand, like Pop said, like you said, they weren't winning close games because they have young guys and they weren't clutch. Well, a lot of teams that depend on young guys who aren't clutch tend to get blowed out a lot. And this team never got blowed out, which says something about them. They didn't get blown out very often, and they would blow out the teams like you mentioned, Portland, that weren't trying. So yeah, that is interesting. The point differential thing. Also think we should cover the just general bases that listeners might have. And I realize our listeners are quite educated, quite informed, and this might be insulting or silly to go over this because I'm sure they're regulars at expressnews.com. They subscribe to the Spurs Nation newsletter, all that stuff. And I'm sure they know how the play-in works. I'm sure they know how all this minutia that I'm about to spell out works. But just for newcomers who may not completely understand it, there's some things kind of tangential to the play-in that we should talk about. Some of them that unfolded over the past few days, the past couple of days of the regular season. If your Spurs do not win 2 games this week to make the 8th seed in the playoffs and play the Phoenix Suns. If they should lose to either New Orleans or that second game at Minneapolis or Los Angeles, they will finish with the 9th spot in the NBA lottery. It doesn't matter if they beat New Orleans or lose to New Orleans. As long as they're not in the playoffs, they're going to be in that 9th spot. And that means that they have the 9th best chance to get the top pick, the 9th best chance to get a top 4 pick. And if everything falls in, if the lottery goes by numbers, then they'll have the 9th pick in the draft. What was interesting about the last couple of days, and there were some differences of opinion on this. Heading into Saturday, your Spurs played the Golden State Warriors at home on Fan Appreciation Night at the AT&T Center. There was a remote possibility that they could have stolen home court from New Orleans for this play-in game, but they were also kind of neck and neck with your Washington Wizards, with your New York Knicks, with the aforementioned Pelicans. And should they have won one or both of those games this weekend, they could have put themselves in a situation where they were already in the play-in game. They were already kind of in a coin flip game against New Orleans Pelicans. They knew who they were playing. They were almost assured of playing them in New Orleans. But if they would have won, they could have dropped 2 spots from 9th to 11th, which means by definition, you have a worse pick. You don't get the pick of your guys that you could have got at 9th, maybe. And I think that the percentage of getting into the top 4 with the 9th spot is 20.3%. And if you drop to 11, it's all the way down to like 8%, 8.5%. So and I realized there were fans upset that in that game against Golden State, basically all the starters were on the injured list. The top backups who started that game, like your Josh Richardson, your Lonnie Walker IV, those guys, because the game was close, Pop kept them on the bench down the stretch and just let Josh Primo and like Joe Wieskamp finish it out. And he let him. I mean, he challenged the call late. He was trying to win with those guys. But the point was, if you win that game like that, that could have done you nothing but bad. And this isn't a team that tanks. Pop has explained that. I think he explained it as recently as yesterday in Dallas about why the Spurs did not tank, why they don't tank in general. I think that's admirable. But on these rare specific occasions where there's absolutely nothing positive to be gained from winning a game, I think it's probably the right move to handle it the way they did over the weekend and just drop those games and then go try to win the play.
So what do you think about coming back the next night against Dallas and playing all your starters 35 minutes?
I think that they
nearly messed around and won that one for a while.
That's true. But this is really getting into the weeds here. The huge risk of the weekend was winning 2 and like letting the Wizards and Knicks both pass you, or the Wizards and Pelicans both pass you.
If the Spurs had won,
losing the first one kind of lessened some of that. Yeah. Another thing is you're probably more confident that you can let your starters go all out and try to win at Dallas against Luka, when the Mavericks also had motivation to win that game. Like, I think that they were sort of okay letting DeJounte Murray, Keldon Johnson, et cetera, Jakob Poeltl play that game and feeling pretty confident that the Mavericks are going to put up a pretty good fight too. So I think it all worked. I think the past couple of days, we're recording this on Monday, I think the past couple of days went pretty much like, if you're a Spurs fan, like you would have wanted them to go.
Yeah, I've been pretty adamant anti-tank since this came up. This season, previous seasons. But once you get to the point where your spot is pretty much locked in, I have no problem with doing what you have to do to sort of maximize your draft position. The other thing is, you're gonna want to sit your starters in one of those games at the end of the season anyway, a back-to-back to close the season. So, I mean, there was some, I mean, even if you're not quote unquote trying to lose, I mean, if this was Pop playing for the second or third seed, he would have done this exact same thing. He would have sat everybody in one of those games and just punted it.
I mean, what are the odds of that if you have an all-star caliber player, a guy who's gonna be the key to competing for a title? I mean, are you really trying to tell me that you play a guy like that in the last game of the regular season, but he could suffer some kind of injury that could keep him out and like tank your whole chances to compete for a title?
I was looking back at that. I was looking back at that the other day. Pop used to always, we would do it just this way. It would be a back-to-back. He would sit everybody the first night to give them their rest, and then play them all limited minutes the second night just to make sure they got up a little bit of a sweat. Because, the playoffs don't start 2 days later. They usually start at 4 or 5. This year it's a week if you're in the actual bracket. So we'd give them that second. He'd give them a little bit of action that second night. And then there was that 2011 in Phoenix where Manu breaks his elbow, running around against the screen and running, fighting over a screen in a game that doesn't matter. He's out for the start of that series against Memphis, plays the final 5 games with that RoboCop thing on his arm. Of course, the Spurs lose, top seed, and they lose in the first round. And I went and looked it up, and for the next couple of years, Pop didn't mess around with either of those games. Like at the end of the season, he was sitting people in both ends of the back-to-back if it came up.
That was just awful seeing Luka Doncic limp off. Yeah. It was just awful.
Yeah. And
if the NBA had kept his 16th technical, he wouldn't even have been out there. So you can blame Adam Silver.
Right.
Yep. And a calf injury, I mean, those doesn't sound like much. Your calf, big deal. I mean, those tend to take a couple of weeks, sometimes longer. It's rough for those guys. You never like to see a team not be what it could be at the playoffs. As much as annoying as it can be to watch Luka complain about every call.
Oh my gosh! I normally don't care about that. Just let people be who they are. I don't care. I'm serious. Like, it's annoying. It's every call. Yeah, it's every call.
Yeah. That's why he has all the technicals. But yeah, it's insane that he got injured out there. That I think at the time of the injury, the playoff spot for them had already kind of been locked up because they were depending on Golden State, which by 20 at that point, if they were scoreboard watching, could have been pulled a little bit earlier and avoided the whole thing.
There's some serious second guessing going on in Dallas today, and it's fair, but it's also like Jeff was saying earlier, you're sort of damned if you do and damned if you don't. With all this type of stuff, I mean, you want to keep your guys in shape for the playoffs, like Pop used to do, and then something like that happens. It's tough. I guess we could get into the game itself. Jeff mentioned it earlier, Tom, with the Valanciunas situation. That matchup. What else could prove to be? I know this is like ridiculous to actually get into like basketball analysis on this podcast. That almost never happens. But what else will you guys be looking at in terms of the keys to how this Pelicans Spurs showdown unfolds?
It's not trenchant analysis, but they're going to need DeJounte to be really good. And I just don't know. I don't know. He's played one game. By the time we get to Wednesday, he will have played 32 minutes in 2 weeks. So I'm glad he got 32 minutes in Dallas. Like that, but I don't know where he is in terms of rhythm, in terms of just being in the flow of the game, being in a groove, adjusting the speed of the game. And he looked good in some ways in Dallas. He had 3 steals. He was really active defensively. It felt like every jumper he took was short. So I don't know if that's a win thing. Will that come back between now and Wednesday? But they're going to need him to be really on point for them to have a chance to pull this out. And so that's one thing I'm going to look at. What's he looking like?
He didn't sound great either in the post-game interview to me. It just still had that congested kind of sound to him. And, he's suffered from allergies. I wanted to ask him about that, whether it's gotten worse here in San Antonio or what. But, Yeah, he lost 7 to 8 pounds, and it must have been a really tough bout with that upper respiratory illness. So I just can't. Yeah.
How does Tom the allergy situation in the bayou in southern Louisiana? How does that compare to the allergen content of the air here in San Antonio?
Got to be better, Mike. Got to be better. San Antonio is just awful.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. You're probably right. Anything you're looking for, Tom, in the Pelicans Spurs showdown?
Well, McCollum, they just can't let him go nuts, and he can just turn it on in a flash, and so their perimeter defense on him has to be spot on. And in these kind of one game situations, that's often what does it. Just one player getting hot and taking over.
Who is the DeJounte Murray? And I'm going to throw Keldon in there because he's been so good lately, and he's clearly becoming kind of the second, the expected second go-to guy on this team. Who is the non-DeJounte Murray, non-Keldon Johnson pick to click in this game? Where you think that this guy who hasn't been the Spurs star all year could have a huge game here and lift them to triumph in this play-in extravaganza.
It's another guy that I think comes with a little bit of an injury question mark, and that's Lonnie Walker. Walker's been really good off the bench when he's been able to play late, since the All-Star break, really since the trade deadline. He's been a pretty consistent flirting with 20 points off the bench every night when he's been right, but he's been dealing with this back issue. I think he's missed. I think he's played in, he missed 5 of the last 10 or 6 of the last 12 of the regular season, just trying to keep it copacetic. The last time we saw him play was against the Warriors. He had 24 points through 3 quarters. I mean, he's that sort of like instant offense, just microwave guy off the bench. And when he comes in and is starting to get those points for you, with the second unit, I mean, that's just a huge lift, and it's hard for the opposing team to sort of counter that. It'll be hard for the Pelicans to counter that if Lonnie has one of his big games, but we just don't know what's up with his back, if he's going to have a good back day or a bad back day. He's only 23, but he kind of sounds like me in that regard, where you just don't know what you're going to get when you roll out of bed. So that would be my pick. Like, if he has a really big game, if he's going to play, I would be shocked if he's not playing, but if he's feeling healthy and has a really big game, I like the Spurs' chances to give New Orleans a run for it here.
Josh Richardson will hit a couple of big threes in the fourth quarter. That's my big prediction here.
Fitting in with the Spurs nicely as a throw-in to a deal that was all about a draft pick. That's working out.
Yeah, he'll hit some big threes, guaranteed.
Guaranteed,
Mike.
We got Joe freaking Namath over here.
That's something. I guess the only other thing to point out since the last time we spoke, the Spurs did wrap up that play-in, which was not wrapped up the last time we did this, and they took it from a team that was supposed to be contending for a championship, and
the Sacramento Kings.
I just sort of find the Lakers thing hilarious in many ways. Like, first of all, for them to have expected that to work, and second of all, for them to lose their spot to this Spurs team, which had no interest from the beginning. The first day we saw Pop back in late September, media day. He was happy. He was boisterous, great mood. But he was saying, this team is not going to contend. The reason all those veterans left is because they can't contend here. We're not going to do that here this year. We're gonna develop. We're gonna rebuild that sort of thing.
Well, they did. And they just did. Got to 10th place.
And they got to 10th against the team that. I mean, the Lakers have 4 of the 75 greatest players of all time plus Dwight Howard, who should be one of those guys. And I realized on the back ends of their career, and I realized they've had injuries.
You could put Kareem on that team and call it, 6, but he's 70 years old or whatever. They're all. It's a cop out to work. Say you're right. We knew it wasn't going to work. I'm still shocked they couldn't get 10th.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, they're very top heavy, and the two guys they couldn't afford to have missed half the year. That's all it is.
I think that's almost letting them off the hook.
Well,
you still have a lot of guys on the team.
Clarify what I'm saying.
Everybody loses players.
Yeah,
if you have LeBron or Anthony Davis, pretty much you had for most of the season, you had Russell Westbrook and Carmelo Anthony plus either LeBron or Anthony Davis. I'm sorry, that should be top 10. It was just a disaster.
Yeah.
I think part of the issue is that no one really expected Russell Westbrook to take such a far step back. You knew he was in decline, and he's been in decline the last few years, but this was kind of like the wheels fell off for Russell Westbrook. The athleticism that he used to use to do everything that he does just maybe isn't there anymore. It's just, he just wasn't very good this year at any stage. And it got to the point where he wasn't even on the court in the fourth quarter. He was so bad. And if that's your main guy because LeBron is out and Anthony Davis is out, you're not going to go very far. They didn't have any shooters. They lost Alex Caruso in their bad decision to get Westbrook. It just was never going to – the roster was just terrible outside of the top two.
That's one thing the Spurs figured out a long time ago was that it's about those role players too. And if you have enough of those role players around, you can weather some of those when your stars are out. That's the Spurs that's when they win those cube state games. And obviously you can't do that for a whole season. But like the Lakers just had old guys that aren't going to be able to carry you, and they had no young blood really to fill in the gaps.
They had a choice between DeMar DeRozan, Alex Caruso, or Russell Westbrook, and they chose poorly, very poorly.
I'm not sure DeMar would have changed much with that team. Like DeMar's great. DeMar's not what that team needed. They needed somebody to space the floor.
Able to get into the 10 seed. He's a lot better than Russell Westbrook was this season.
Yeah.
And then to cap it all off, poor Frank Vogel learns yesterday.
Your tweet.
Yeah. Yeah. That's which, I have to ask you, Nick, am I safe until next Monday, or, what's the situation there? That's scary.
You had a better year than Frank Vogel did, Tom. And the whole thing about him learning via tweet, like Frank Vogel knew a month ago he wasn't going to come back.
I guess so.
Sure, nobody told him. But I don't think that Frank Vogel was shocked to find out that he wasn't going to return as head coach for Los Angeles.
He might not want to return to that mess anyway.
What I would love is to find out that Frank Vogel was Woj's source. That would be great.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Frank Vogel will not have a job in a couple of days, but he might be much happier. He might be able to appreciate what's going on around him because he's not going to let others define his success, just as none of us should. We should just find happiness in our own way. And I think that Frank Vogel will be fine. It helps that he has millions of dollars probably. Maybe not all our listeners do. I know we have a high demographic in terms of salary, and Luis does all that research. I think our average income of our followers is in the high six figures, but that's neither here nor there. I think that we can all take Frank Vogel's lead and just find some appreciation, even if we're not appreciated where we ply our trade. We can find appreciation somewhere. And in the meantime, take care of each other and keep it real. We'll see you.